Here's a shock. Owning guns doesn't preserve freedom. Really interesting article in The Atlantic. Now, we hear a lot about guns are freedom. In other words, if you take away people's guns, you are taking away freedom. More freedom is good. More guns are associated with more freedom, and therefore more guns are good, and they go hand in hand. And also further, if you take away guns, that's what the government does when it wants to become tyrannical, when it wants to be dictatorial or otherwise take away freedoms. We've heard this many times, have we not?
Yes.
So we had now a study done where this is fascinating. We had a compilation of data from the most recent Small Arms Survey, which is the most wide-ranging international survey of civilian gun ownership. And this tells you internationally what countries have higher gun ownership. And they correlated it with the Freedom House Index, right? Which the Freedom House Index ranks freedom. And on this particular graph I'm going to show you, a higher ranking means less freedom. So they correlated. Let's look, right, Lewis? Let's explore this. Let's plot on a chart gun ownership versus freedom. And we got something that's pretty interesting. Let's put this up for people, Natan. And as you take a look at it, you'll see, do we have that, Natan?
Yep, it's up.
Okay, I'm not able to find it myself, but, oh, here it is, yes. So as you can see here, and I'll describe this, what we see is a blue line, and the blue lines indicate gun ownership. And as you see at the far left, the highest gun ownership rate is the United States, followed by Switzerland, and then we go down with Serbia, Saudi Arabia. And as you go down to the right, gun ownership decreases. And the red points indicate freedom. Those indicate freedom. And as you can see, there essentially is no correlation between countries that restrict gun ownership and freedom as described by the Freedom Index, which includes a whole number of factors. In fact, there happens to be a very small negative correlation. There is a 0.33 factor here where more guns happens to correlate with slightly less freedom. Now, again, we're not saying that it's actually causation, but it just so happens that not only do we not see correlation of more guns, more freedom, we happen coincidentally to see more guns and slightly less freedom. There is no trend there, Lewis, that conservatives would want us to see.
No, but this is also a worldwide study. So if you take just the United States, so many Americans believe that guns are freedom because they think it says so in the Constitution.
Right. Well, what's interesting is you can actually figure it out. If you cherry pick data, if you say, well, look, the U.S. and Switzerland have a lot of guns and they have a lot of freedom. China and Cuba don't have a lot of guns and they don't have a lot of freedom. Okay, if you want to really take that and cherry pick data to convince people in a very dishonest way, you can do that. But I would hope most people are smart enough to say, well, hold on a second. Let's look at the 175 nations for which we have data about gun ownership and freedom, and then let's evaluate, right? After all, Ghana and Indonesia are both at the very bottom for gun ownership rates and are very free according to the Freedom House Index. And on the other hand, Yemen and Saudi Arabia have very high gun ownership rates and have very low freedom.
I just think this is sort of an irrelevant point if you're trying to debunk the rights argument in this country, it's an irrelevant point because really what they're going to say is that for them, their definition of freedom includes the full freedom to have any gun you want. So it doesn't matter that another country has freedoms regarding freedom of speech, association, religion, economic opportunity, but not guns. They're just going to say, well, that's not enough. We need to have freedom of gun ownership.
If they do that, though, they are changing the argument because the argument they make is that as a pretext for reducing all types of freedoms, governments seize guns and restrict guns. So you're not wrong, Natan, that they would make that argument. But when we're really talking about, broadly speaking, freedom of all kinds and the ways conservatives claim governments start to restrict those freedoms, it doesn't make sense. So you're not wrong.
What they would say to that is that the countries in Europe that have, not Switzerland, that have low gun ownership and high freedom indexes, they would just say that those people who live in those countries are much less prepared to withstand a potential future infringement on those rights by the government than we are here.
And I would say to them, hey, if you want to take your argument from reality to hypotheticals, you've just weakened your own argument. If you have to backtrack and say, okay, fine, it doesn't actually happen now that more guns equals more freedom, but hypothetically it could, I think that you've actually won because you've made someone take an argument, a real world argument, Lewis, and have to make it a hypothetical one.
I suppose that makes sense, yeah.